Well then, this is going to be an interesting video. So, one of my many hot takes of last year was about the film Bohemian Rhapsody, and the idea that it honestly isn't very good. And I've been wanting to make a video about this film for a while, and I wasn't sure how. So, I'm just going to do it in the same way I did that Bird Box video. Some good things about the film, though. The acting's all fairly good, and Rami Malek is absolutely exceptional here. He wasn't my favorite nominee for Best Actor this year, but I'm definitely very happy that he won, although I personally would have picked Bradley Cooper for A Star Is Born. The film is fairly well shot. It's nothing spectacular, but I never found myself getting annoyed by any of the framing choices, and there are some very visually appealing scenes in the film. The music was great, although that's to be expected with a film that's based on the lives of the members of Queen. The costumes and hair and makeup were all great. There are some entertaining sequences throughout the movie. I know this doesn't sound like much, but what this film does well, it does really well. But yeah, that's not really what I'm here to talk about today. First off, this film was kinda hell to make. So, believe it or not, Sacha Baron Cohen was at one point meant to be making this movie. And his version seemed a lot better. It seemed a lot more honest, truthful, all that kind of stuff about Freddie Mercury's life. And according to director at the time, Stephen Frears, something that Freddie would have actually been proud of. But making an honest look at the life of Queen and Freddie Mercury was not something that actually appealed to the rest of the band of Queen, so they decided to just fire him and make the most played safe movie ever. They also felt that Sacha Baron Cohen would probably be too comedic to actually play this historical figure well, because comedians can't play historical figures apparently. It's honestly kind of a shame because what Sacha had in mind kind of sounded interesting and entertaining, but instead we just got a very standard run-of-the-mill, poorly written biopic. And then you have world-renowned film director Bryan Singer. So basically at one point Bryan Singer was directing Bohemian Rhapsody, but then I guess he just stopped showing up to work. That's actually what happened. And then he started getting violent towards his co-workers, and then he was fired from the project. He was then replaced with Dexter Fletcher, who was left to try and salvage everything that was left into a movie. This man is now working on the upcoming Elton John biopic. Although if you watched the movie knowing this, it became very comical when this credit came up. And speaking of the actual movie, this movie has one of the most generic biopic scripts I've ever seen. Have you ever seen a biopic before? Yeah? Okay. Have you ever seen a film about musicians before? Real or fictional, it doesn't matter. Have you? You have? Okay. If you've seen both of those, you've seen Bohemian Rhapsody, because this film does nothing to differentiate itself when it comes to its script. It expects you to care purely because of who the characters are, and not really anything else. It goes off name basis instead of actually developing anything. And again, this can be largely blamed on the remaining band members of Queen themselves for wanting to play it completely safe instead of making anything honest, or interesting, or good. But without question, the worst part of knowing Queen had a major hand in making this film is the absolute bastardization of Freddie Mercury. This entire movie, his character is just so unlikable. He's not even a realistic asshole, he's just an over-the-top, unbearable dick of a character. And I use the word character here instead of person, because it is so transparent and so see-through. Every other member of Queen is such a nice guy and such a good person, but then you look at it in real life and you realize, hey, they did pretty much the same stuff. So they're just dragging down a dead man to save their reputations. How nice of them.
I've signed a deal with CBS Records.
You've done what? Without telling us.
This scene is particularly infuriating because it treats this whole situation like Freddie is backstabbing and betraying the rest of his band members. But prior to this, 2 other Queen members had signed solo deals. So I don't really know what all the fuss is about. It's only actually here to try and create drama, and in doing so, make Freddie Mercury more unlikable. It's a scummy move on the part of the other bandmates, and it's just overall unbearable to sit through. Speaking of forced drama, this whole film just feels way too convenient and squished together. Because I guess they couldn't think of anything interesting to fill up the movie, so they just decided to make everything up. Oh man, we can't think of anything honest about our film. Why didn't we hire the one person who The film also goes by way too fast because of its writing, although considering the runtime of the film that is ironic. But things happen way too conveniently and it just completely takes you out of the atmosphere. Oh wow, isn't it convenient that the day Freddy Mercury asked Queen if he could be the lead singer was the day their lead singer just quit? Oh look, it's a scene where they went into the studio and recorded a song there and then without actually trying to do any writing or anything. They just made the song in the studio on the day and the time and the place. Oh look, it's another scene where they wrote the song and made the song in the studio there and then the day and they didn't actually have to do any prep for it. They just made it there and then. Oh my god. Stuff like this is exactly why I feel like this film is so inorganic and fake. It's just way too unrealistic, let's say. Everything happens way too conveniently for it to actually feel real and for me to be remotely invested. There are plenty of biopics that I like that are guilty of doing stuff like this, adding fake things into a movie to try and make them more interesting. But at the same time, this very often makes a film worse. In the case of Molly's Game, there is a scene in the film which was shoved in for no reason, aside from to try and make things more interesting, I guess. And the scene is so bad that I removed an entire point from the film. It's just so forced when biopics always try and do this. I think Deepwater Horizon is a really good film, but that Coke can scene is just there to add Final Destination-esque foreshadowing, and it's one of the worst parts of the whole movie, although it did supply some really good unintentional humor. And Bohemian Rhapsody is kind of a worse version of those kinds of gimmicks in biopics. The whole film just feels so fake, and as a result, nothing feels like it matters, the characters seem like assholes, and there's just no investment whatsoever. The Live Aid scene is particularly one of the most annoying scenes of last year. Okay, credit where it's due to the scene. Rami Malek does a great job, and his movements match Freddy's in a way that is just pitch perfect, which is ironic considering the entire scene is so very noticeably dubbed. But either way, credit where it's due. But whenever you do a concert scene in a movie, one of the most important things, in my opinion, is making it feel real. So, how does Bohemian Rhapsody do on that? Yeah, this scene does not do a good job at all at making me feel invested, or feel like any of this is actually happening. It, again, like most of this movie, feels fake. And for comparison, let's take a look at a concert scene in A Star Is Born. The actual music hasn't even started yet and it already feels more real. The instruments are being tested out, there are screaming fans as he walks up on stage, and you even get parts of his character in there. And one of the most important parts of this scene in comparison to Bohemian Rhapsody to me is that it is a real crowd. Some of these people are probably real, but there is no way in hell most of them are, and most of them do not look like they are actually real. And then you have all the overhead shots, which are just... And just for comparison, Bohemian Rhapsody's budget was significantly higher than A Star Is Born's. The amount of close-up shots on him while he plays the guitar make it very obvious that this scene is dubbed, because you would not be able to get that close to him with him still playing it. The only thing that makes it more obvious is the continuity error, because that's not the color of his guitar here. Oh, and the audio mixing in this scene is terrible. Yeah, this clapping wouldn't drown out these instruments. I'm sorry, it just wouldn't happen. And for comparison, in case you think it would, here is footage from the original Live Aid. You can hear the clapping, but it doesn't drown everything out. And in comparison, the clapping from Bohemian Rhapsody just sounds like stock sound effects. It's honestly kind of embarrassing that this film won both audio Oscars with this lack in quality in its audio. And speaking of embarrassing Oscars this movie won, you look like an angry lizard.
Sure, he said 12. Yes, midday. Have a cup. Don't be drunk. That's what he said. You look a bit nervous, Brian. John, I'm fine. Usually so put together. You just got to be cool. Wow. Wanker. I didn't know he was fancy dressed, Fred.
I've got to make an impression, darling.
You look like an angry lizard.
I could make a ton of jokes about this and just meme it like everyone else has, but I just want to address seriously for a minute just how terribly edited this scene is. There are so many cuts in this scene. This is Catwoman levels of editing. It's that bad. That's the level of bad we're talking about here. It's so piss poor, and yet it somehow won the Oscar. I guess they just gave the Oscar for best editing to the film with the most noticeable editing. And even then, maybe Vice, which I think is a much worse film. But, oh god, why this? Of all the films to let win the best editing Oscar, why on earth did it have to be this? And the bad editing doesn't just end at this scene like some people claim it does.
Screw him. Everyone up on the drum risers. Up on the drum risers. Come on. Thank you, Chrissy, showing some enthusiasm.
Wives and everyone.
Yes. Come on, John, everyone. I'm not waiting any longer. Get up. Bass. No, you don't need it.
Yeah, it's not as bad as the Angry Lizard scene, but there are still way too many cuts in this for it to flow naturally.
Bohemian Rhapsody. You will forever be known as the man who lost Queen.
This is another one of those films that feels like we need a reaction from every single character, and it just makes the film's flow so much more jolted. Some of the film's worst editing is nothing to do with the amount of cuts, though. Take this scene, for example. These titles are legitimately distracting and take me out of the scene completely and utterly. I remember when I first watched this movie and I just wondered, why the hell are these here? I mean, I knew why they were there for purpose of explaining, oh, they've been to all these places, but you couldn't have done it in a more creative way that didn't take you out of the atmosphere of the movie? Okay, then. Maybe they did actually have something good, but when they wanted to film it, the director didn't show up to work that day, and so they just had to work with what they had. Overall, this film just kinda sucks. This is just one of those films that gets worse and worse the more you think about it. I remember I talked about this in my Oscar nominations video, and at that point I thought the film was just mediocre. And yeah, it's dawned on me to the point where I decided to even make this video. I just genuinely really don't like this movie, and even if I don't think it's an awful movie, I still have a kind of hatred for it. Not based on quality, but just based on how biased and untrue the film is. The whole film just has this kind of disgusting feel to it, and I don't just say that because the director allegedly fiddled with kids. Ultimately, the film winds up being disrespectful to the man it's trying to honor, and it bogs its story down by adding pointless conflicts to try and make things more interesting and just make them more annoying. Mike Myers' character literally didn't exist before this film. This is also one of the most manipulative films in recent memory. I mentioned in the beginning of the video that I do really like the music in the film, but I wasn't referring to musical composition there, I was just referring to the fact that there is Queen music in this film. And the film uses that to try and manipulate the audience into liking the film. If this was any nobody band, nobody would be talking about this film. And it's kind of infuriating that the name of the band Queen just got slapped onto this nothing of a movie. Without the acting and music, this film would not have gotten any of the recognition it did, and it wouldn't have gotten 4 Oscars. I've heard rumors that they're apparently considering a sequel to this movie. I don't know how that would work, and I don't really want to find out. I don't know why you'd make a sequel to this. Unless you're finally giving Sacha Baron Cohen permission to follow his vision of what he wanted to make, then full go ahead with that. But anything else that's in this vein is not really something that I'd want to see. Who knows, maybe I'd see it just to make an entertaining follow-up video, but based off this, I don't imagine it would be very good. Although maybe if they kept one director this time, it might be more consistent, and who knows, maybe it could be good. Maybe Rocketman could be good. Who knows? For now, certainly not me. But what I do know is that this film is kind of a failure when it comes to trying to portray Freddie Mercury and Queen's life. When it comes to actually giving this film a score, it is much higher than it may seem from me, because again, I hate this movie for reasons outside of quality. It just kind of feels disgusting and ingenuine to me. As an actual film, it is bad but not terrible. It is watchable enough. And speaking quite honestly of the Best Picture nominees last year, having now seen all of them, this isn't the worst. This isn't even the second worst. This is definitely top 3. It's the third worst of the bunch. But I don't hate this like I hate Vice, and this is better than Black Panther, although not by much. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend this film, although people seem to love it, so make your own judgments, but personally, I just would not recommend you check this out, ever. This isn't really a film I think is worth supporting in any way, although it did rake in over $800 million at the box office for some reason. If you want some music movie in this vein, maybe go for last year's overlooked Modern Life is Rubbish. I'm not going to call it a perfect movie, and it does share some similar issues to Bohemian Rhapsody, but it balances out a lot better. It's a much more entertaining watch, and it's actually good. I'd recommend you check this out over Bohemian Rhapsody. I've talked about Wild Rose before, and I still think it's phenomenal, and I definitely recommend you check that movie out. It's coming out in a couple of weeks, I think. Definitely check it out when it comes out, it's great. And I think it's fairly obvious I'd recommend A Star is Born based on what I've said in this video. I could go further into detail about how the people who made this are kind of scummy, and also Rami Malek's really stupid comments about Bryan Singer post-movie, but that's not really connected to the movie itself. This overall, though, is a very disrespectful cash grab of a film that takes a man's life and runs it into the ground. This film feels like it's killing the legacy of Freddie Mercury, which is also fitting in that it also feels like AIDS. I would not recommend you check this movie out, and I'm giving Bohemian Rhapsody a 4 out of 10, which is much higher than it feels like it deserves, but at the same time that is an accurate score for the movie, and I'm just not going to let my hatred for it get in the way here. That's the end of this video. Like, share, subscribe, I'm bad at outros, and I'll see you whatever I do next.